the title of my presentation is Product Branding, Investment, and Sustaining Folklore Identity. Just a little bit of background on me. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, what does somebody who has investment analyst and consultant on their resume, what will they be able to add to a discussion on folklore identity? The point that I'm going to try to put across today is that I don't presume to talk to you about postmodernism or discourse or literary theory. These are beyond my expertise. However, I do bring a certain skill set. I understand what it means to make a solid business case. I understand the importance of reputation, branding, and customer service to the success of a business. And I'm capable of considering the practical view in the value chain process. This paper will try to argue that taking a practical and tangible approach to an impractical and intangible problem of retention of folklore and identity is worthwhile. Some call it creative capitalism to expand businesses into wider markets. I consider it a balancing of the ledger and the natural process of market efficiency. Humour me while we take a strategic management approach to the issues of folklore and identity. Let's first consider the major issue. The rise of the global community and the scale of speed of multinational corporations has led to the loss of cultural identity for a number of indigenous and tribal communities, whose oral and traditional knowledge has been appropriated for commercial mass production. Two good examples of this are bioprospecting and biopiracy. These issues, whilst important, are beyond the scope of my presentation and relate to a legal discussion with the World Trade Organization, national governments, to recognise the authority of international patent law for indigenous communities. To me, such issues, whilst worthwhile, are beyond the topic of discussion because they are beyond the scope of indigenous communities resolving the problem. They require a significant level of legal training, time and money. Critically, the aim of this paper is to examine what skills new knowledge systems can share with indigenous communities that are complementary to the retention and exploration of indigenous culture. The skills necessary to evade international patent law do not form the type of linear link in the art. Whilst it may form part of a longer-term goal, it is not reasonable that it should monopolise academic thinking when shorter-term goals are achievable. Just as a CEO must defer to his or her legal representatives on matters of international patent law, so should an indigenous community. A subtle yet equally important example is the sale of indigenous produce in the conjunction with indigenous people. This to me is a determined step in the right direction. However, I contend that it falls short also. It assumes, whether overtly or not, indigenous communities lack the requisite ability to be responsible for the front-end process of the value chain. My experience in the field has taught me these skills are not inbuilt for large corporates and unattainable for smaller players. These skills can be learned organically. We are not talking about international patent law. Whilst it is reasonable to assume that a CEO will defer to his legal team on international patent law, if a CEO is not across his brand strategy for quality of product and customer service, it's going to be an unemployed CEO pretty quickly. Just as a mom and pop store shopfront recognise that they can't compete with international brands, I'm not suggesting that indigenous communities should go head-to-head with multinational corporations. Mom and pop stores offer a personal touch. They offer produce that you can't get at the larger stores. They are a niche provider. An important concept here to the success of any niche operator is framing of that brand. In the immortal words of the American rapper Jay-Z, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. You see the distinction? He sees himself as a brand. He himself is a brand. He's a niche operator. He's not a businessman, he's a business. Uniqueness and authenticity is what great brands can only dream of. And sometimes they'll fight tooth and nail to access this. for the right to hold originality and individuality. It is something Indigenous communities hold and often are caused to give away too cheaply. We need to impart the quality and exclusivity into this process. Let me give you the example of Jean-Claude Bevet. Jean-Claude Bevet is a giant of the Swiss watch industry. He has this uncanny ability to turn around brands. I'll give you two examples from his career. In 1981, Bevet and his colleague purchased the Swiss watch brand Blancpain. Now, Blancpain went out of business because of the proliferation of battery-powered quartz watches. The mechanical Swiss watch the Swiss were famous for was going out of style. Many industry participants thought that Blancpain had missed the boat. Bevet knew two things. He knew that Blancpain was Switzerland's oldest watch brand, so the first mechanical Swiss watch. This is a level of originality and individuality that can't be recreated. It's the original. And he knew that the quality of his product was undeniable. So Jean-Claude Bevet put out this slogan: since 1735, there has never been a quartz Blancpain watch, and there never will be. This was a game changer. New no longer meant better, it meant low quality, it meant mass produced. Old no longer meant superseded, it meant quality traditional methods, it meant a quality product. Just to give you sort of a quantum of that, Blancpain, the brand that Bavarians colleague purchased for around 24,000 Swiss francs, is valued a decade later at about 65 million Swiss francs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Indigenous communities don't really produce a whole heap of Swiss mechanical watches. Well, Bevet also makes cheese, and this is maybe more relevant example. A few weeks a year, when the meadows are flowering in his Lake Geneva-based farm, Bevet uses the milk from his grazing herd to make cheese. The milk is heated over an open fire with hand-cut wood. The time and cost of this process seems unreasonable, given the price you achieve for most cheeses. Bevet then ages this cheese over the summer months. The slow and quality-driven process only yields 5 tons of cheese. Buyers from around the world clamber at Bevet's doorstep to even get a small portion of this product. They recognize the quality and the slow trade process that's going into the product and the exclusivity of it. There's only 5 tons available in the market. When jewelers order 10 watches, Bevet delivers 5. He is acutely aware of the importance of not commoditizing his product. Modern corporations survive and thrive because of their versatility and their willingness to adapt. Notice I use the word adapt, not necessarily change. They understand consumers look for certain things: quality, consistency, and authenticity. Modern corporations know how to market and sell these traits once they have them. What they do not generally know is how to apply them. In my view, the business world can be described as a stage of comparative advantage. Modern corporations have a comparative advantage in sales and marketing. Traditional methods and Indigenous communities have a comparative advantage in creating something truly unique and individual. What modern firms understand is if they appropriate this knowledge for commercial purposes, they have the two sides of the product coin. Modern corporations look to leverage this comparative advantage on Indigenous communities for their own advantage. Now, in a business context, if only one side is partaking in the comparative advantage process, maybe it implies that the market is not efficient, perhaps there's trade barriers in place stopping the other parties to engage in this or legal restriction. So perhaps we need a mandate for level of quality or a more efficient market. This is not the case for sales and marketing. The tools of branding, reputation, customer service are attainable for Indigenous communities. There is no mystery in their application. And importantly, these skills can be taught and learned organically given the right environment in a fashion consistent with retention of folklore identity. To empower Indigenous communities is not a pipe dream. It is not a nice-to-have skill. It is a must-have skill. It needs to be approached with the same level of respect and duty as preserving Indigenous ways of life. If we can give Indigenous communities the tools to build reputation, brand and sales strategy, we can provide them with the tools to provide for their own sustainable future. A future that is intrinsically linked with the retention of their own folklore identity. To suggest producing products is enough and to leave the marketing and sales to larger or more sophisticated players, in my view, does not help towards, well, it does help, but it does not go all the way towards retention of folklore identity. Implicit in this approach is a separation between new knowledge systems and old knowledge systems. It suggests that new knowledge systems somehow sit to an advantage to old knowledge systems, whilst new knowledge systems can cross the divide and leverage the information from old knowledge systems can't do the same. I don't believe this is the case. This sort of attitude leaves Indigenous communities feeling rightfully shortchanged and rightfully uninspired by the idea of retaining traditional methods and culture. We need to let Indigenous communities understand the entire value chain, to decide for themselves the role they play within it. We need to remove the mystique of the front-end process. What this does is allow Indigenous communities to appreciate the practical, quantifiable value of retaining folklore identity. It offers future generations within these communities a sustainable future and a tangible reason to retain folklore identity. They can control their own destiny and not merely be the first step in a value chain in which they see not that much value. To achieve such an outcome, we need to provide a structure in which Indigenous businesses can develop and flourish. We need a community-based model which allows for a slow trade approach. Products are manufactured with time and care, using the best ingredients and traditional quality methods. Volume is a dirty word. The manufacturing process is not centralised, rather community-based, so as not to disrupt everyday life, roles and responsibilities. Strategy, sales and marketing meetings need to be held in an accessible, centralised location with experts volunteering their time in the product learning process and providing a platform for Indigenous communities to test and deliver their products. My view is that case study-based examples need to be discussed hand in hand with real products and company representatives. Indigenous communities need to be able to analyse, touch, feel these products to understand what makes them tick, what makes them special and sought after. We need an organic learning environment, not lecture-based, but an environment which is hands-on and process-driven. Developing these skills is all method and process-driven. There is no secret formula. Coming back to the point I made earlier, remove the mystery. The key takeaways. Just as new knowledge systems leverage the skills of old knowledge systems, let's turn the tables. Bigger does not mean better. A process-driven, quality-based approach to niche offerings provides a quantifiable path to securing Indigenous sustainability that is intrinsically linked with the retention of folklore and identity. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get down to it.